So if somebody's shopping all of these different rental boiler providers, how big of a factor is freight really?
Freight's a huge factor.
It is.
It is. It's a big factor. Freight's expensive.
Hi, I'm Tim, and this is RAS Class.
Hi, I'm Tim, and this is Rash Class.
All right. So, welcome back, everybody. We wanted to bring in Tim Plain, the manager of our rental group, and we wanted to talk through just a number of things around rental boilers because it's a whole different animal. So, especially if you're not used to working around boilers at all, and all of a sudden yours has a problem, and somebody says, "Well, we'll get a rental, get it here, figure it out." You want to start us off with kind of what it is you do?
Well, we service, maintain, and repair our rental fleet, which is 14 boilers. And then we have outside customers that we maintain in their rental boilers and keep them ready to go. So we usually have a good stock of boilers here, sizes from 50 horsepower all the way up to 82,500 pound per hour water tube boilers.
Nice. So a lot of what we're doing, it sounds like, is just keeping those boilers ready to go at a moment's notice.
Yes,
Okay.
that's our goal.
And so if somebody has an emergency, their boiler goes down or has a repair that they need, and they don't want to shut the plant off, right? They're going to get a boiler coming. How fast, like what kind of time frame should they be looking at? How fast can they have a rental boiler online?
Well, there's a lot that goes in ahead of time that we have to do
Okay.
to put in a rental boiler in. First thing that we do is we send out a rental boiler checklist. It takes about 2 minutes to fill it out. And that gives us confidence that they have an understanding of what they need and that we're getting them the equipment based upon the information that they provide us. So having that information up front is critical. And then the other thing is a lot of these are permitted loads. So we're at the mercy of the DOT. A lot of weekends we can't move permitted loads. So we have to be delivered on site usually by 4 o'clock on Friday. And they'll shut us down on weekends. So we can't rush these. We have to take our time, get all the information, be prepared for it. We can usually deliver a boiler if we have it here ready to go and we have all the information and permitting wise, we can deliver in 24 hours. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot more that goes into it after that. Once it's on site, it has to be internally inspected. We have to do a hydro test because it's considered a used boiler. So we can't just roll in and hook it up, flip the switch and make it run. So that timeline, it usually ends up being about 5 to 7 days after we get the go, just because of all the logistics and everything involved.
So you talked about the checklist and you talked about the inspection. I want to circle back to those. So first you talked about this rental inspection checklist. What kinds of things are on that checklist, and can you just maybe hit a few high points and why it's important?
The checklist that we send out, it's an editable PDF form. It literally takes, if you have your information, it takes a minute to fill out. Email it back to us. It just asks for what type of boiler do you want? Do you want just a skid mounted boiler? Do you want a complete mobile boiler room?
So what would be in a mobile boiler room then?
Everything you have in your existing boiler room. So there would be a feed water system, be a blowdown separator, chemical feed.
Okay.
Water softener, everything in there rolls in. It's an entire boiler room.
Versus just a boiler that you're going to hook up to their boiler room.
Correct.
So if their feed system's still working, they maybe don't need the boiler room. They might be able to get just a boiler.
Exactly.
And if they're renting only a boiler, those are larger sizes then, right?
Correct.
So that's where we can get to the 82,500 pounds an hour. Okay, but
Those
nobody really rents that with the feed system?
They do occasionally. There'll be a
Okay.
feed system that we can have. There's not as many feed systems as there are rental boilers.
Gotcha.
So
Those can be hard to get.
Those availability of those are pretty tight.
Okay, and the simple stuff that comes to me is like, well, what voltage does the plant run at, right? Is this motor going to work?
Right.
And another one that I've heard of people running into is with like the amperage of the service, right? Because these are hard start. You don't have a VFD on a rental unit, correct?
Correct. On those, and then so your voltage and amperage is very important. And gas pressure.
Gas pressure. Okay.
We have a maximum inlet pressure that we can take at the boiler. If you have a higher pressure than that at your plant, we have to know that so we can provide a regulator ahead of the boiler to knock that down.
Awesome. Okay. So what about steam pressure? How much of an issue does that create when there's a steam pressure mismatch?
That creates a big problem when people will say one thing and then we get on site and they didn't have all the information and they need a different. We can, if they're going to tell us they're going to be operating at 120 psi, well, we can send a 150 pound design boiler. Well, we get there and we find out that no, they're operating at 150 psi. Well, now we got to have at least a 200 pound design boiler. So having that information up front is very critical. It's all on that checklist. It asks for boiler horsepower, what type of boiler, gas pressure, voltages, elevation is an important thing. We need to know if this is going to Colorado. We need to know where their elevation is at so we can make sure that we don't have to bump the boiler up because for capacity wise. And then site preparation too is important. These things, the big water tubes, they weigh 100,000 pounds. So we can't just pull them in and park them on dirt. Mm-hmm. Even any of them, we need to be on a solid surface so they don't sink away. It's a lot of water. We have a lot of weight to that, so we got to have a good solid surface for those to sit on, and it's got to be level. Okay. We can't pull in and park them on a side hill or anything. So
and if it's not, can they crib it up, or do they need to have like gravel brought in, or what do they need to do as far as preparing that site typically?
A level spot with some gravel, and then we can do steel plate if we need to under those, depending on where it's going.
So if we know, we can account for it.
We can account for all that stuff ahead of time, right? We have to know all that.
But if a truck shows up, the truck driver's not going to crib it. The truck driver's not going to prepare the site. So somebody has to be aware of that and prepare for it.
Right. We try to make a site visit to every rental boiler before it delivers, just to make sure that the assumptions that the customer's making align for what's really needed.
And if it's far from here, then how does that work? Do we recommend a partner for them, or that they work with their local shop, or kind of how does that work?
They'll work with their local shop. I'll ask for pictures of
the
post. Where are you going to set this? Send me a picture of where you're setting this. We lay an eye on it and see what we have.
And then do you touch base with their mechanical contractor to explain to them what's all needed?
I will.
Or do they usually have a pretty good idea?
Most of the time they have a pretty good idea, but I'll usually talk to the installing contractor.
Cool.
And then we prefer to do startup on all of these units because there are units they're going to be ran. We want to make sure that they're running the way that they're supposed to be ran.
Right. Well, we're firing them to make sure they run before they leave, right?
Yes.
So you're just saying to make sure that the plant is going to run it the right way.
Right. So we're setting controls, we're setting all the limits, everything to be in line with how the boiler's going to be operated.
Their gas pressure, their plant, their steam pressure. You still have to customize that.
Right.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, the other thing we wanted to circle back to was inspections. So is that, when it shows up on site, you said it has to be hydro tested and internal inspection.
Correct.
Who's that inspection for?
Depending on the location, like the state of Iowa, that'll be their insurance carrier will have to come do that. Other places, depending on the jurisdiction, it might be the state inspector. So all that has to be scheduled.
Okay.
And you're at their mercy. And a lot of those inspectors right now are there's not a lot of them out there. Everybody's short on inspectors.
So that's what you said about planning ahead.
Right. You want
to schedule that inspection as soon as possible.
Correct. We had one here recently. We had the boiler on site in 24 hours, and they were ready to go over the weekend, but they couldn't get an inspector until the following week, so they can't run that boiler. And
so you said sometimes that the inspector is the insurance inspector. So on a rental boiler, are we insuring that through our insurance company, or does the customer insure that with their insurance company? I've always wondered how that works.
The customer's responsible. They have to carry insurance on that piece of equipment.
Okay. So the customer is insuring the boiler. The customer operates the boiler,
yes.
Right? So we're really just like loaning them this boiler, but they're running it as if it's their own. They're insuring it as if it's their own. But there's not strings attached like, oh, it's our boiler, so we insure it, and we're gonna run it for you and whatever. Like, no. They really need to treat it like it's their own.
They need to operate it and maintain as if it were their own.
Okay. Tell me a story about a time where a customer had an issue with their boiler, and they continued to operate the rental boiler in the same way, and then they caused an issue with the rental boiler.
Right, because usually if they have a rental boiler, it's because they haven't operated their boiler properly.
Right.
It's usually water treatment.
Okay.
So we go through everything when we do startup training on daily operation, maintenance, and everything on that. Show them how to do the blowdowns, and we'll test the water to make sure that we're getting soft water. We go through all of that, and then I usually try to do like a couple times a month follow up with them, see how everything's going.
Okay.
If there's any issues with anything going on close enough, we do a drive by.
So you mentioned water treatment. Is that really the number one issue that we see?
That's the biggest reason that we see that people need a rental boiler is they've scaled up their boiler. They got plug tubes on theirs, tube failure, things like that are done. It's usually water treatment that's caused all those problems.
So as far as maybe there's not a typical, but is there like a typical blowdown arrangement for rental units? Do they all come with conductivity meters, or do they all come with manual valves? How is the control of blowdown, if that's the number one issue, how is that done on rental units versus maybe their site installed boilers?
All of ours are set up with pre-piped manual valves on it. We have a sample cooler on there so they can check their water on a regular basis. Check TDS and know where we're at with all of that. So I have seen it get better over the last couple of years of people doing that. I think they realize the expense.
Sure.
And know that their boiler's in the condition that it is because lack of. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that this kind of changes their mindset. It's like, oh, now we got this one to maintain. We better do a better job with this than we did with our own.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah, they realized there was a training issue or an equipment
Right.
issue, and they fixed that when they get the rental boiler online.
Right.
Because a rental boiler could end up with 2 broken boilers instead of 1.
Exactly.
Right. So you talked about, this like 5 to 7 day window. Is there anything that a customer can do? We talked about having a really nice level spot, I assume near the boiler room. What other things can a customer do to help get that boiler up and running as fast as possible?
Have the tie-in points. Have your contingency piping in place.
Can you explain what a tie-in point or contingency piping
So
is?
every plant goes down at least once a year for some maintenance, where the entire plant is down or there's an opportunity somewhere within there. So install, at least at minimum, put a T in a valve in your steam line, your natural gas, your feed water, and your blowdown. So you can, if you can, run it to the outside of the building, so it's right there stubbed in, makes for a quick tie-in, but at minimum have those valves in place. So when you do need a rental boiler, you're not having to take an unscheduled complete downtime. You can roll this in. You may have to operate at a reduced capacity till you get the rental boiler in and going, but you're not completely down.
Right.
So
And if those tie-ins have a valve, tell me if I'm crazy here, but if there's a valve there, you can do the tie-ins while the plant runs,
exactly.
and then open the valves and bring the rental online, and then they could isolate their boiler and bring it offline.
Right.
So it's like a zero outage contingency then.
Right. And if they have 2 boilers, they're operating on one boiler.
Sure.
Tie ours in, tie the rental in, open the valves,
Sure.
up and going.
But if they just have a flange, you're gonna have to shut down.
You're gonna have to shut down.
If they don't have any connections and we have to cut into pipe to add flanges, you're gonna have to shut down.
You're
So
gonna have
now
to
it's a
shut down.
black plant, no steam
Right.
shutdown for at least a day or 2 while you get all that done.
Right. Shut the system down, cool it, make the tie-ins. Yeah, you're probably talking at minimum a 12 to 24 hour shutdown.
Right. You're not gonna hot tap a steam
No.
line like that.
No.
Right. Is that something we recommend for all plants just as a contingency, or people that have known issues, or it kind of depends on the cost of their outage, right? I mean,
Really, for what it costs to do it, any plant that has the boiler, their mechanical device, something's going to fail at one point or another.
right.
We don't know to what extent it's going to be, but yeah, every plant should have at least a tie-in point. If not, the contingency piping ran to the outside of the wall, ready to go.
Right. Sometimes I'll drive by our rental boilers or somebody else's rental boiler, and I'll see that they've put like scaffolding and plastic wrap around it, or they've built a little hut. Like, can you talk about what that's for and who pays for that, and what's that game?
That's really for our Midwest winters for freeze protection, so that we don't have, get your boiler sitting outside and we get 20 below zero and 40-mile-an-hour winds. You're going to freeze up sensing lines, all the little lines where there's stagnant water in, they're going to freeze up. And it's a real simple enclosure. And we found that just a scaffold frame built around it with reinforced plastic, and then we'll take scaffold plank across the top of it with some plastic on that. And that retains enough heat in there that we don't have a problem with them freezing up in the wintertime.
Okay. So as far as operating permit and inspections, you talked about those inspections from the state or their insurance provider. Do we set that up? Do they set that up? how does that kind of work? I know
Well,
sometimes that falls in the middle.
Yeah, we'll work with the insurance people and talk to them to talk to the inspector to find out exactly what they're going to want. One thing I did miss is there's an advance notice that has to be filled out for every boiler that goes in, whether it be brand new or used. Most states require that to be a 10-day advance notice. In an emergency, they will waive that. So I'll work with them. It's usually the responsibility of the owner to do that, but it takes me a minute to fill it out because I'm familiar with it. So I'll fill that out for them to do that. I'll talk to the insurance inspector, determine, what the extent of their inspection. Some states will allow, if there's been an internal inspection done within the last year, they call that the current NB6 inspection. If that's been done within the last year, they'll waive the internal. Iowa does not do that. Iowa requires an internal inspection no matter what. So we maintain those inspection reports. We get it from the previous rental location, keep them on file. So we can provide that to the inspector if they're willing to accept that.
When you ship a unit, I assume we do some kind of like pre and post inspection to make sure, just like renting a car, right?
Right.
We want to make sure we're giving them out in good condition. And then if it comes back with damage, we're doing some kind of post inspection, right? Can you talk about what are we looking for? What are we doing for checkouts before they ship and some of those kinds of things?
We have a checklist that we go through. We have an inbound checklist that we go through. So when it comes back, we thoroughly inspect it and go through all that. And then part of that is we'll test fire that unit. We'll hydro it, make sure that everything is good. So that shortens our outbound inspection. The outbound inspection is we like to hook power back up. We at least want to get power to it, run everything because, it may sit for a few months between rents. So we want to make sure that everything is up to snuff and operational before it goes out.
So before it leaves here, you're powering up all the controls and making sure all those instruments are good.
Yes, we're checking everything before it goes.
Okay. Because I know we've rented from some other companies in the past, and they don't always get that kind of white glove treatment.
Right.
Okay.
Right. We try to treat everything that we're going to be the people doing startup and operating it. We want to know that it's up to speed.
Now, I've seen you guys hook up some pretty large rental boilers and run them. Are we running every boiler on the inbound and the outbound, or one or the other? When do we actually hook up gas to them and fire them?
We test fire on the inbound. When they come back,
Okay.
we do our inspection and then we do a test fire on everything.
So in between each renter, all of our boilers are actually being fired.
Yes, they are.
And are we bringing them all the way up to pressure or temperature, or is it just checking out those controls? What does that look like?
We'll run them up and we'll try to go through. Usually we'll typically run it all the way through the curve to make sure we have no issues anywhere. That we have something may have happened while it was on site. So we want to know where that's at. So we try to run them all the way through the curve, low fire all the way to high fire.
And do we send them, if we're not going to go commission it, do we send them with like a setup sheet for that receiving technician or anything like that?
No, there's not too many that we don't do startup on.
Gotcha.
So we have a few trusted partners that we'll work with, but there's very few of them.
Right.
And we want to make sure that they're familiar with all the controls and everything that we have on that particular boiler.
Right. Because what's the danger of not hiring us to come commission it, or somebody who's familiar with those units? What kind of issues have we seen? Do you have any horror stories of where they hired a local that was, much closer, maybe faster, maybe who they work with all the time, and they bit off more than they could chew, or didn't understand how something was set up?
Oh yeah, we had one recently within the last 6 months that they had their local guy do it. It was a few hours from here, and he claimed he was familiar with AutoFlame and everything, and he wasn't, and got way off in the weeds on what he thought he was troubleshooting, and ended up rewiring the feed water valve, wired it backwards, had everything. It was a mess, and we ended up spending more time fixing what they did than it would have taken us to go do startup.
So what is that? It they pay for their monthly rent. What other costs are associated with renting a boiler?
If a blower motor goes out, if a level control breaks, if a component breaks, we'll fix it. If the person renting it breaks it, they get billed for it. That's the easiest way to explain it.
Okay.
So, we can't expect them to pay for every little part if it just failed, right?
Right.
So,
Kind of normal wear and tear we
normal
cover.
wear and tear we'll cover, but if there's something due to neglect or lack of something on their end, then it's a billable item.
Can you give me an example of something neglectful that maybe would be like, dang it. Sorry guys, we got
Freeze protection's the biggest thing.
freeze protection.
Yep, That's the biggest thing. If they don't properly protect it from freezing, we had that happen last winter. Customer just about had it covered with enough shelter to do it, but didn't have all the blowdown piping enclosed, froze and broke. So that was, I think, about a time it was all done, probably a $12,000 repair that they paid for.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Ouch. That's, nobody wants that.
We have a servo motor go out. We fix it. We maintain it.
And we've got those on the shelf.
Yeah, we got them on the shelf. We take care of it.
Quick and easy. So what about shipping to and from the site? I mean, is shipping, does the customer pay for that? Do we include that in the rent and install and commissioning and all these? How does that go?
I break out my quotes so everybody understands what
okay.
it is. So they can see the monthly rent, here's freight, installation, startup, commissioning, and then also removal. Everybody forgets about the removal because there's a cost involved in disconnecting it. You got to take all the piping down and then
get it ready to go back down the road.
Get it ready to go back down the road.
Yeah.
So, and then, then freight back. So freight to there, freight back is all above and beyond the rental price.
Right. So if somebody's shopping all of these different rental boiler providers, how big of a factor is freight really?
Freight's a huge factor.
It is.
It is. It's a big factor. Freight's expensive.
So it sounds like shipping logistically, that could be the difference between getting a boiler tomorrow and getting a boiler next week, right?
Exactly. And that's our location here is a big advantage for us for having the units that we do. We can save, if they've got to go from the southeast or the east coast, west coast, you could, and you're shipping a water tube, you could $25,000, $30,000 freight each way. So our area here that we cover, I think the highest freight that we've ever incurred on that was probably $6,000, $7,000 each way. So our freight inbound and outbound is less than one way.
And that's large boilers.
That's large boilers, right?
So when you talk about enclosed boiler rooms, I see those out in the yard. They're more like a Connex box, right?
Right, they're a Connex box, but it gets charged by the mile.
Oh, sure.
So the more miles you got to move it, the more it's going to cost you.
For sure.
And it's a one way for that truck, so you're paying deadhead miles
for both to and from.
Right.
So you're really paying 4 trips.
Right. So you're going to pay him from where. A lot of these, like they'll do that, they'll drop the trailer wherever. A lot of them, if they're over the road guys that come here and pick up, they'll drop their trailer here, and then pick up the boiler, take it to the site, drive back here, pick up his trailer, to continue on where he was going. So we use dedicated haulers from here. So they pick it up, they drive over there, and they come back. Now you got to pay that, but you're not paying all that. That guy, I had a guy divert from Texas here to pick up a boiler.
Wow.
So they paid the deadhead miles from Texas to Iowa, took the boiler, and then back here, and then back to Texas. So that gets really expensive when you're doing that.
For sure.
So that's a huge advantage we have for having the number of units here that we do is freight. Freight can make or break it. Rental prices are
pretty even across the industry.
There's 10%, 15% difference. But when you start adding in the freight, that's where it makes a big difference.
So tell me a little bit about what kinds of things affect that price. Do vendors charge more for better controls or for newer units or anything like that? Or is it mostly just based on capacity and availability? Like
capacity and availability. When it comes down, when somebody's needing a rental, their last concern is controls. Mm-hmm. We just recently rented a boiler and we ended up getting burner controls and feed water controls upgrade out of the job because we rolled in with our boiler and they saw it and they're like, oh, we got to have that.
Yeah, they see how much easier it is
right.
to run with modern controls.
Right.
They've been working on this 30-year-old
right.
boiler and didn't realize that they're putting a lot of extra work on their own.
Didn't realize what they were missing.
So, right, sure. One more thing I wanted to just talk about is, so you talked about the water tubes. I know that's a big part of this for the kind of the larger capacity steam boilers. But if somebody's tying that into a system that has 150 PSI design fire tubes on it, what's the design pressure typically on those water tubes? And then what kinds of other things do we have to do to make that system work together?
Design pressure in the water tubes is 399 PSI.
399.
399. Okay. So what we need to do, and a lot of inspectors overlook this, and I always bring it up and include it, is having a relief valve set to match either their plant max relief valve or their existing boiler relief valve. and have that size for the capacity, full capacity of that water tube boiler at that set pressure. So if it's 160 psi that the other ones are set at, then that relief valve gets installed in the steam line between the boiler and the plant.
So the boiler has its normal relief valves
Right.
that protect the rental boiler.
Right.
But then you're going to run the boiler at a reduced pressure. So then you have to add another relief valve in the piping between the boiler and the plant.
Right. So if that boiler ramps up above, that we're not overpressurizing theirs
And the system, right?
and their system.
So you're going to actually have to bring in that. So that's where the worksheet comes in.
Right.
You're going to have to bring in an additional relief valve. You're buying it just for their project.
Just for their project.
So that it protects their system.
Right.
Okay.
So we don't overpressurize theirs. Because the boiler's protected up to 399.
Right.
So we protect their system with an additional relief valve.
But because we're buying that valve just for them, it's really their valve when we're done.
It's their valve. And we just tell them, tag it and
Keep it.
keep it. It's yours. If you're going to need a rental again, you're going to have it.
Right.
And at times I'll try to identify it and make it match something they've already got. So here, you've got another relief valve here. You can use this one in place. Or we try to match it up so it's not a complete,
Just wasted money.
wasted money for a one-time use.
What about success stories? Do you have any
Yeah.
stories that stand out where it's like, man, this one went really smooth? How fast did you get the boiler up? How did that go?
My favorite success story is with one of our partner companies. We picked up a brand new 1,000 horse mobile boiler room in Kansas from the manufacturer. Had just been completed, never fired before. We picked it up at noon on Friday, and we had it online running and inspected by 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon.
Wow. So 2 days.
2 days, 48 hours.
Nice.
They had contingency piping in place. The inspector was someone I had a good rapport with, who agreed to come out on a Sunday, but I had to be there with him. I said, that's fine. So, but yeah, we had it up and running on Sunday afternoon.
That's fast.
Yeah.
But they knew where they were putting the boiler. They had
Right.
everything in place.
Everything was in place.
So that's a minimal outage then.
Right. There was no outage required for it. We rolled it in, hooked up piping, and did that.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, I'm through all of my questions, Tim. What other things do you want people to know before they call in to rent a boiler, or what other kinds of things questions should they expect to get from you, or?
They're going to get the checklist from me.
Yeah.
I'll prepare a quote. I'll do everything, but I won't ship. They can give me a PO, but I'm not going to ship that boiler until we have that checklist. That covers everything.
And that's really so that they don't spend all that money to ship a boiler that just won't even at all work.
Right. It's not going to fit their need.
It's for their benefit.
It's for their benefit. A site visit is important, and have the contingency piping in place. Have it there.
Anything else that we need to cover?
Most rents that I get, we need it for a month. Unless they're cleaning a tank, doing a simple maintenance task somewhere, they're never a month. Always plan for longer than a month, because it takes about a week to get everything in place and get the boiler up and going. And then depending on how extensive a repair or whatever they're doing to theirs, lead times on equipment, all that. So if you're renting a boiler in June and you think you're going to need it for a month, plan on 3. You don't have to worry about weather protection. If it's going to be rented in October and you think you're going to need it for a month, no. Better plan on some weather protection. Have all those things in place. And power is a big thing too. Make sure that all the buckets are available for the power that we need.
Well, good. I don't have any other questions. I appreciate you coming in today.
Yeah.
I think this will be really informative for anybody who's in the market for a rental boiler. They're probably watching this because their boiler just quit and somebody
Right.
said go rent something.
Yeah.
So hopefully this conversation saves them a few hours of heartache.
Right. It can be a smooth process if we do it right.
For sure. Great. Well, thanks, Tim.
You bet. Thanks.